good morning or good afternoon. Please make sure your cell phones are on silent mode before we begin. And today we are wrapping up Member Appreciation Week. So when you leave, pop into the auditorium there for a snack, and also you can renew your membership as well. William Baxley has more than 30 years of experience in ocean engineering and offshore operations, including 16 years as a U.S. Navy test engineer and diving officer. He has been involved in all aspects of ocean technology, including all class of underwater vehicles, advanced diving operations and deployment, recovery operations of large complex systems. He is proficient in finite element cable and structure remodeling and is active in several design projects for ocean energy and academic research projects. He currently serves as Chief Engineer for Florida Atlantic University's Southeast National Marine Renewable Energy Center. He is responsible for the overall planning, operation, and maintenance of an offshore ocean energy test facility and all technical support for center users. He is also pursuing his PhD in ocean engineering. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Baxley.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay. But I can do all that, but I can't turn Good? Okay. All right, cool. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks. My name is Bill Baxley, and the stuff that you just talked about, I'm not going to talk about anything else because we're going to do something completely different. But I do work up at Harbor Branch, and I do work for Ocean Energy, and we come down and give talks about that too, how we're trying to harness the Gulf Stream. So, but today I'm going to go over this rather ambiguous title here, Unanticipated Archaeology Using Remote Sensing Techniques in Central Florida. And so as part of my PhD program, I took a remote sensing class where you, instead of going out on the ground and actually looking for stuff, you use satellites, airborne systems, and other detection methods to look for things, right? And so in the course of that class, I was looking for one thing, and it turns out I may have found something else. But since I'm not sure if it's what I think and hope it is, I'm not very explicit about saying it's a feature, right? A geological feature at the moment. But as I go along, you'll kind of see how I tend to think what it may be. So first I'm going to start with the project of locating a freshwater spring using this remote sensing, okay? Because as it says here, sometimes springs or other features are on private property or very heavily wooded regions where it's hard to go in and actually look for stuff, right? And so in this particular case, we weren't allowed, well, not me, but the state wasn't allowed to actually find where the source of a particular spring was. So I said, well, let me use this sort of technology and we'll see if we can kind of look over the fence and find where it may be, okay? And it's also up in Lake County near Leesburg, which is where I'm from. So I'm very familiar with the area, and so kind of tied in with all that sort of thing. So the questions for the initial project were, using satellite pixels, because what a pixel is, it's a picture element, right? So if you have a TV and it has like 760 versus 1080 or something, that's the number of picture elements, right? So that tells you how sharp the image can be. Well, satellites are really great for looking at huge areas, right? But each one is about 100 feet by 100 foot. So it's really hard to see something smaller than that, right? Because you only get one color of something. But there's other ways that you can use satellite data to help you look for things, which I'll go over. And then there's other systems such as LIDAR and aerial photography, which are either drone-based or aircraft-based, and that's a much higher resolution, and you can see smaller things. So the potential problems were the pixel size, getting satellite data, because as I'll show, they're not continuous. You have to figure out when they're going to be overhead. And then trying to physically access some of these places for ground truthing, because if you say, okay, cool, this is where it is, I want to go in and actually see it. Again, we're right back to the point A, right? Private property in heavily wooded areas. So, but you need to find something before you can actually go and try to try to get access for sure. So, so what I was looking for is a spring that is not precisely located, and so I was going to try to find where that is. So, as we all know in Florida, Florida is the most numerously populated spring state, and so as you can see here, let's see if does this work here. There we go. So as you can see, the springs are mostly in the northern part of the state, although there are a few down south and even a few offshore, because this is the actual escarpment of Florida that during the last ice age, this is where the coastline was, not this close. So there's probably a lot of stuff out here, a lot of springs and even other archaeological features that are there. And I have a colleague up at FIT, he's doing his PhD on exactly that, going to these springs and searching around them out 200-300 feet of water and seeing if you can maybe find some settlements that were out there as the water moves, right, over the last several thousand years. But what I'm going to talk about is just looking for springs because they're very important as far as the hydrology of the state and also as far as they should be protected resources for a variety of things. So the springs come from the Florida aquifer, if you're familiar. So that same escarpment that I said Florida was on, it's made of limestone, which is very porous with fresh water. And so as the hydrostatic pressure pushes down, the spring water wants to come up. And so there's the aquifer down here, which is basically the stored fresh water. There's a confining layer normally. It's either thick sand or mud or clay or something where the water can't get through. And then every once in a while, there'll be a break through there and a spring pops up, right? Like Silver Springs up in Ocala and all the other 100 or 1,000 plus that I just showed on that slide. And so these are very important because not only do they flow out, they flow in. And so pollutants can get down in here and then really affect our water quality, right, in Florida. Because otherwise, if it's not for the aquifer, we don't have any other source of fresh water. We get it from the ocean and that sort of stuff. So from a scientific hydrological perspective, that's why I was starting to look for this spring, because not only are they important, but I also personally like to go to springs and dive in them and study them and stuff like that. So again, this has nothing to do with ocean engineering. It all has my interest with geology and going to springs and that sort of stuff. Okay. So just to give you an idea of the magnitude, how much water is coming out of these things, right? So there's four. Well, actually, there's up to 8, but we're just going to talk about the first 4. So the first magnitude is kind of like Silver Springs. If you've ever been there, there's just so much water coming out there, and it feeds that entire watershed, right? That's the magnitude 1. Then there's smaller ones, which they still put out quite a bit of water, like Wakaiva Spring, Itchitucky, if you've ever drifted down the river on a tube or anything like that. If you've never been in there, don't jump in first before you check the water, because my son, when they were little, I put the tube in there and he had no idea it was 70 degrees. It was like 100 outside, and so that was pretty awesome. That's how we build trust, right, Bill? So anyway, so there's springs like that. There's third magnitude, which aren't quite as much, and then there's fourth, which are basically seeps. So they're like sand boils, and just the water barely comes out, but over time there's a lot of water that comes out. Okay, so the spring that we're going to be looking for is a third magnitude spring. And so it doesn't put out quite a lot, but it puts out enough over time to actually develop these channels and these little stream beds and stuff. Okay, so the spring of interest is Double Run Spring. It's up in Lake County. And so the state has come up with this position. There's a road that runs through here. And so that's the closest that they could get to actual the spring. That's why it says approximate. So it's a third magnitude spring, discharges in a swampy area. They hadn't found it because of the thick underbrush and public owner, which is the reason I'm trying to use remote sensing. And then there's a culvert that runs under the road, and that's how they take the measurements and figure out, what magnitude it is, right? So they measure the flow through basically the pipe for a little while, and it gives them the daily flow rate and stuff. But there's still this area down south, and it's like, well, if the water's here flowing north, then it has to be coming from down here somewhere. So trying to accurately locate that in about a 1 square mile area, but doing it remotely. So this is a Google Earth picture of it. And you can see that there's a heavy overgrowth because there's swamp and stuff up here. But this is the run that goes out to the lake. So it starts picking up about here, but how does it get from here, right? So how do you do that without going and tromping through the swamp and asking people to get on their property and do that stuff? Did I really say tromping through the swamp? Sorry, that's my Leesburg. Okay, so here's the spring. And so this is filmed at the culvert. So you can see that there's not a lot of flow, but it's visible. And over time, it could be, hundreds of thousands of gallons a day if you just let it keep running like that. And so it's coming from somewhere. That's to the south. And so how do we find that without going on the property or cutting our way through the swamp? So this is the area. So this is the approximate area where they think this is where the state thinks it is, or hopes it is. And then somewhere in this area, it's going to be, but you see how heavily wooded it is, because most swamps, they're very, because of the water there and everything else, it's very hard to get in there and find stuff. Plus, if you have a landowner that doesn't like the government, it's kind of hard to do. So how are we going to do that, right? So first, I'm going to go and look at all the files that may show where all these springs are, which is where I got that yellow dot from. So go and look at the existing data and also reports and studies, because springs around it, they can give you some idea of that pressure I was telling you about, right? The aquifer pressure coming out. And so you can figure out, okay, well, it should be in this area. Then you go, well, what are we going to look for? So water temperature differences, right? Because springs are normally, even though they're in the low 70s, they're usually warmer than the surrounding water, right? So you might be able to look for a temperature difference. Water clarity, so you might, as the spring comes up, it's really clear and it runs into a brackish area, or not a brackish, but a turbid area, then you can tell the difference there. The vegetation, because if there's always water there, chances are the plants are going to grow better, right? And then proximity to other water bodies, because if there's water coming out continuously, it needs to run somewhere. So you can look at all those things. And then what's the significance, right? Well, like I said, they're windows to the aquifer, so if you put something on the ground, pollution or whatever, it's going to go right in there. But you can also get information from the water coming out, so it's good for that sort of thing. Protection, and then land management for rampant development. And so up around Leesburg, there's this place, you may have heard of it, the Villages. And it's just growing like wildfire, right? And so this sort of information helps the regulators to make sure that they're not over pumping the aquifer, because then if you lower that pressure too much, nothing's going to come out, right? And even worse, it could backflow. So if the pressure's down too low and you have the lakes up here, it could go back in the aquifer and then you're polluting it. So that's one of the main reasons for looking for springs and being able to monitor them, is for this sort of stuff. Okay? We're good so far? Okay. So as far as water clarity difference, this is Blue Spring Run, which I don't know if you've ever been up there, but it's where all the manatees go in the winter. And it's a big spring, really clear water. And this is the St. Johns River. So you can see how clear. These are actually manatees there. I don't know if you can see them. I'll shoot through over there for you too. But these are where the manatees are. You can see them. So the clear water comes out, hits this, and you can tell that there's a clarity difference between here and here. So if you're looking from space or from an aircraft, you might be able to use that to say, oh, well, there's clear water coming from somewhere. So maybe that's where a spring is. So how do you do that? Well, again, we go back into look at our existing data. We use what's called a geographic information system. Have any of y'all heard what that is? Or CAD software, where you can draw stuff, right? Well, everything in CAD, if you're going to draw, like, say, a square, this is 3 inches long by 4 inches long where it starts. Well, a GIS system is basically takes the Earth in longitude and latitude, and if you have a feature like the spring, you tell it where that longitude and latitude is, it puts it on the map, and everything is georeferenced, they call it, right? So everything is where it is on space, on the Earth, but on a map, so you can see if they're close to each other. And that's why in that first slide with all of the springs, that every one of those has a longitude and latitude, and it actually shows that some of them are in their lines and groups and that sort of stuff. So GIS is what I've used to do most of this. So we use Google Earth, a couple other aerial photography sources, and then satellite. What we do, because what a satellite does, remember the old the old TVs that had, if you got too close, besides getting brain damage, Right, Mom? You can see the little pixels in there, each little square. And if you got too close, you could actually see that some were red and green and blue, whatever. So that's what the satellites do. So they look at different spectrums of light and then either put them together or look at them separately. Near infrared for water detection. So infrared can't see water. So if you see something that you get zero signal, it means there's water there. So it's one of these cases where no signal equals a strong signal. That makes sense? The absence of something is also a result. And then shortwave IR is for measuring how much soil and vegetation, how much water they have, and also temperatures. You can measure the temperature just like that water temperature I suggested, right? So you can use satellites for even doing that. And then the LIDAR, light detection and ranging for elevations, that's like a relatively new technology. And what it does is basically let you take all the trees and everything away. So you only see the ground. And that's what I'm really going to talk about here in just a little while. Okay, so first the Landsat. Landsats 8 and 9, they're specifically designed and deployed to measure the terrestrial part of the Earth, land. And so they have various sensors on here. And this is what I was talking about. They're not always available, right? So these are their orbits. So these red lines are their orbits. And they make an orbit every 8 days. So to get our little area of interest here, you need to figure out where it is within this block and then say, okay, well, that's what I want. And so you have to go back and look at the data. But what else is going to affect what that satellite's taking pictures of? Cloud cover, right? So you might, depending on the season, you might miss a month or two just based on cloud cover because it's all random. It's not random. But, you never know when it's going to be. So you can't go out there and see a full month's set of data and really look at things. You have to just catch as catch can, right? And so this is the cross track. So it's 185 kilometers wide cross track, which means as it comes by, it sees that much. And then a long track, it's about that same. So it's like these tiles, right? That's what you get as it goes along. You get a bunch of tiles, and you have to find the right tile. And they're at 705 kilometers altitude. So that's what the satellites are. So that's that. It's just very quickly. So what am I looking at? I'm looking at path 16, row 40. And then this is Landsat 9, Landsat 8, when they are, trying to figure out how many matches there are, how much is the cloud cover, and then we got the similar cloud cover. So you're trying to take of all those fairly rare things and find a couple that match. So that's what we do. So as far as the sensors, this is what I was telling you. So there's blue, green, red, and then infrared, other different types of frequencies of light that they can detect. And so the first three, just like the old TVs, we're using that for color, right? To see what color either the water or the plants or anything else is. The red and near infrared, we tell the health of plants. So if the plants are distressed or they're not getting enough water or food or they're just flourishing, okay? So that's how we can tell plant differences from space. And then the shortwave infrared is where we can see temperature. So that's where we can see the temperature of, like, say, Blue Spring versus the temperature of St. John's, and you can look at that difference. So it's all about differences, right? And looking at it from different perspectives. And when you stack those differences on top of each other virtually, it kind of shows, it all focuses in on one particular aspect, right? So that's how we do it with satellite. And this is just really quickly a slide showing this is natural color, so that has red, blue, and green. Then you can do these color enhancements to look for different things, right? And so one of them is the normalized difference vegetation index. I know that's a lot to say, trust me. But basically what that's doing is telling you the health of the plant. So in this case, we're getting near infrared, which is reflecting back the water inside of the water or the lack thereof in the leaves. This is how much it reflects back. So a nice dark green tree isn't going to reflect that much light, right? Whereas a dry tree that's dying, or in the fall, they're a lot brighter and it's going to reflect a lot more light. So that's how the satellite does it. It compares the color of the leaves and how much reflects. And so that's these ratios down here. So if you get close to 1, it's a nice healthy green tree. If you get close to 0 or less, then it's a distressed plant. And so again, if there's plants growing where there's enough water for it, really healthy. If it's away from that, though, and depending on the season, it might not be there. It might not be as well. Okay? So this is a result. So this is a scale, remember, from 0 to 1. So down near 0, it also picks up the water. So it shows you the water, so it's dark blue. So that gives you the lower bound of what we're looking at, right? This whole spectrum of what we're looking for. So we can see the water, we can see fairly distressed plants. See how these aren't very, I mean, I'm sure they're fine, but they're not as vibrant. And so that shows up as these wider areas right around the middle of the range. And then these really dark green areas, that means the plants are really doing well, right? They're getting enough nutrients, they're getting enough water. And so that's a place that, because there's water, there may be a spring there. Or because there's nutrients, there may be something else buried there, okay? So that's how we do it from space. But you notice, remember I said the pixelation? You really don't get a lot of resolution on looking for tiny little things, right? So that's the drawback of space-based satellite systems, is that you have low resolution, but you can use tools like the temperature and the infrared and stuff to look for these larger features. So you find the big things and you try to focus in on the little things. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, cool. So, LIDAR, light detection and ranging. So my first experience with it was in the ocean, where instead of going over with a boat like a depth finder and looking for the depth of water with sound, you have to just, number one, you're in a boat, so you're bouncing all over the place. You're just shooting down and you're making very small point measurements. You're going maybe 10 knots if you're lucky, right? So it'll take a long, like say we were surveying this area, it'd take a long time to go down each one of these rows and measure the depth at each place and then make a map, right? You put it on an aircraft and you can fly at 200 knots back and forth and do it in a much faster faster time. But the problem with light, especially red, is that red is absorbed about this far when it goes in the water, right? It's absorbed very quickly. And that's why when you see all these diving videos, everything's kind of a bluish tint or whatever, because the red just doesn't get down there, that part of the spectrum. But everything looks blue or green. And so what a LIDAR system does, it uses the red laser from the plane and it bounces off the surface. So that tells you how high the plane is, right? The green, up to about 150 feet, especially off of Fort Lauderdale, those type of places, the green hits the bottom and bounces up. So that tells you the height of the aircraft over the seafloor. Subtract the two, you get water depth, right? So that's how you can measure depth with an airplane using lasers at 200 miles an hour. So that's a very good way to, that's how we do bathymetry surveys these days, at least in shallow, clear water, as we go out. And you can also look for other things in the water with this as well. But it's mostly for reading bathymetry. So does that make sense? The different colors of light, you can use them for different things, right? Okay, so terrestrially, you can put this same sort of system on a small drone and fly that over, and it does the same thing, right? So the laser goes down, and depending on, it doesn't have the absorption properties, but it will reflect off of either the trees or the water or other things, just like the satellite. The different frequencies will come back differently, right? So you can tell the difference and you can take a small drone out and just run it over an area like the size of this campus in a day, and you can map down to like a centimeter of accuracy on everything. So you can make a digital model of everything on here by simply flying a drone with a LIDAR over. And it gives you, now you can take that into the computer and you can do all kinds of things with it, right? Now you digitize the world, basically. To remember that one. Write that down. So here's a video, and let's see. So this is about LIDAR. So what it's going to show is that it goes out and it measures it, it makes the model, it breaks it down into what's called a point cloud, and then at every position it looks for the furthest position from the drone. And that will give you what? The ground surface, right? So because there's so many lasers, there's like a million lasers a second or something crazy like that. Some lasers are going to get all the way to the ground, even in heavily forested areas, even through the leaves, some of them are going to get to the ground, right? And so what you do is you go to every point and you say, what's the lowest in that area? And you subtract everything else, and it gives you a ground elevation, bare earth they call it. This is what the drone is flown over, and it's imaged with its lasers, right? So this isn't photographs, this is all data. So the height is based on the color, and so all the trees, all the ground and everything is all digitized based on that scanning laser. And you can see it's just all three-dimensional. It's amazing how. Used to, you'd have to go out there with transit and take surveys. So this is the point cloud, right? So these are all the verticals. You take those out using the software. And then it basically gives you a terrain model. So that's what the ground looks like under all those trees. See all those different grids. Now once you have that in, you can put a surface on it. And then you can also make contours, right? So like anytime you have any development done on a property, you have to get a survey, right? So in the past, again, they'd have to go out there and they'd have to shoot everything. Now you can fly over with a drone and get these high accuracy bathymetry, sorry, it's my ocean talking. These topography models and show what the ground is, and more importantly, what's under the trees, right? Okay. That's the gist of all this. What's under the trees? Okay, so what we did with Double Run is this is LIDAR. The state has done almost a complete statewide LIDAR survey. And so you can see the spring run that I showed you on the Google Earth. Comes down here. This is where Double Run is. But now you can see this is a slope coming in. This is the sand all running into the swampy area, right? But then on the other side of Double Run, which you can't see for the trees, look at this little channel that runs through there, right? So now that we got rid of the trees, we can say, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, it's really low through there. So maybe there is something out here. So now we can go and look for it, right? Now that we've got rid of the trees. So this is zoomed in south of the road where they measure. So we know water's going north from south. And so not only do I take the ground surface, but you can also enlarge it. So instead of just 1-to-1, you can say 4-to-1, 5-to-1, 10-to-1, and it really accentuates those elevation differences. And then, so that's what I did here. And so this is that green area that we couldn't really get into, but there's a little channel through here. And looks like maybe a little spring pool there, right? Looks like maybe something there. And then you come on over here, and there's a little something right there, but look at this channel, right? So chances are this is a multiple vent spring, right? So it has one here, and then there might be another one here, and they just both add to each other and feed out into the swamp on the north side of the road. By taking the trees away, we can go in and do all this sort of stuff. So that was the objective of my project, was to locate these springs, because also since it's in the computer now, I can come in with my mouse and simply click on that, and it'll give me its longitude and latitude. So now you can tell the water management people, say, I think this is where it is. Here's what's called a digital elevation model, a DEM. Now you can go in and y'all can start looking at it and not have to go to this place, or they can contact the owner and say, look, we found this and we'd like to come in and look at these 2 specific points. But what's the risk of that? Why are you looking over my fence, right? Why are you looking at my house from space and you didn't tell me about it? Well, the state did it, I didn't. I just looked at the data. But that's just one of those privacy things, right? But the scale of this, you can't see somebody, sunbathing or anything. I've looked. But I haven't. But anyway, so out there, it's not necessarily that, but that's something for the state to worry about, for the water management people. But the point is, you can take away the trees, accentuate the topography, and really find some of these ancient channels and stuff, right? Okay, and then another thing you can do with that digital elevation model is you can measure the slope from point A to point B, because water does what? It runs downhill. So what this shows is I started here at that little one, and I just drug this line all the way out towards the lake, and you can see it's high here, comes down, that's the road. So the laser actually saw the road, so that's why that's higher. The culvert's right there. So it goes from about 65 feet, and it slopes down into the lake at about 61. So it's not a big slope, but it's enough for the water to because it's a slow flow, right, as we saw. So it's enough for it to get out there once it comes out of the ground, and it slowly gets there. But it shows that chances are that's where the vents are. So, and as a result of the next thing I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk to the water management people, because I'm going to show them the same thing, and they might be interested in going out and doing this, right? So that's the objective of that. So now that we found the spring source, well, what else did we find, right? So this is the air photo, but when I turn it into 3D, it goes from just a nice green spot to that thing, right? So there's something there, right? Under all those trees and in the swamp, there's something that's about 10 or 12 feet higher than everything else around it, okay? So there's something there. If you look at it from a plant perspective, the plants are different, right? They're doing better there than they are out in the general swamp. And this is called a hill shade, where you raise it up and then you put an artificial light on it, and that's why you get the shadows. This is called a pseudocolor, which means you take different colors and you assign them to height. So like red is low and blue is high. So you can just kind of look at it and get that. And so what this shows is that the river, or this creek is low, the swamp is low, but whatever this thing is high, okay? But you never saw that from this picture, right? I mean, what does this look like, not knowing what you just saw, but what does that look like just looking at it? It doesn't look like a hill, does it? It looks like a hole. And so the whole time, well, not the whole time, but initially I was like, oh, that's just some sinkhole or whatever it is over there, you know? So, but you take it away, you take everything away, and now it has elevation, it has size, and it's surrounded. So 65 feet in the swamp, pretty much. Again, this is all from that LIDAR survey. 65 feet all up through this whole swamp, and then, but right at this area, which is about 1,100 feet long, which is pretty big, and about 660 feet wide, there's some big mound of something. I ain't saying it's an Indian mound, but it's a mound of something out there that has these contours in it. And over here, this almost, and this again, this is just, thinking about the possibilities, but you know how your mind can run. But this almost looks like there may have been either a bridge or a causeway across here. Now I know that's a little advanced for pre-Columbian peoples, but this may have been sand as well and just got washed out from floods or whatever, right? But the point is, there's something here. So what does that look like to y'all? Now that I've kind of led you into the... Looks like something that was made, right? Okay, right. So, as we all know, in the 1800s, Florida was, I wouldn't say ravaged, but I just did, for timber and all kinds of other resources, right, back in the day. I mean, there's very few virginal stands of timber around, but I was like, okay, well, maybe in the 1800s, they were out there, they were digging, and they just piled it up. Well, how can I look back in time without aircraft, without satellite, without all this other stuff and see? Well, the closest I could get was this aerial photo of Lake County. So this is the whole lake, the whole state, taken in 1948. Basically, they just took a bunch of pictures and put them together as a mosaic. And so it shows, Leesburg is up here. These are some of the lakes. Lake Apopka is over here. But this is basically just the whole county. But I don't know exactly where things are on here, right? So what you can do with a picture that doesn't have longitude and latitude or came from Google Earth, it's called georectification. So what you do, you say, all right, these 2 points on this picture right now, this is the Doric Canal. I don't know if anybody's been out there. This is the Doric Canal. It's a fairly famous waterway up in Lake County. That's the bridge. And then this is Highway 441. And there's this little feature here. So both of these, the bridge and the road, were there in 1948, okay? So now, take a recent Google Earth picture, put it in the computer, and I say, okay, well, I know where that bridge is, and I know where that is there in geographic space. The other thing you can do if you don't have bridges, this is a point over in Lake Apopka. So I took a point off Lake Apopka when Google Earth found it, And I did that all around the county, all around this picture. I got known points all over it. Then, again, with GIS, tell it, say, okay, I want you to geo-rectify this, the old picture to the new, and it moves everything in around. And so then the result is you have an actual picture from 1948 that you can look at any position on there. It's really cool how the software can do that. And so it's a little hard because it's a black and white picture, but this is the feature. Kind of see it there? In 1948, and this is where the spring pool is in 1948. So all this area here, the higher areas, have been cleared for citrus and other things, right? But they're staying out of the swamp, right? Because you can't really work in a swamp or grow oranges or anything there. And so if they don't, and if you're not looking for anything, so it's at least been there since 1948. And based on some of the other stuff that I saw, this really hasn't been harvested for timber. So anyway, so it's been there for not quite 100 years. So anyway, so that's how I did that. And then you come back to real life, not real life, real time. And there's the feature, there's where the springs are, and there's the spring room. Okay? So that's, again, how you can take old stuff, old pictures, and modify it into the real world, and then actually manipulate it and do stuff with it, draw stuff on it, or try to find things. Okay, so based on that, to me, I think it's a possible mound, right? So we've gone through and we've done aerial photography, the LIDAR, hill shade, pseudocolor, and then we also looked at plant differences. So that seems to be pointing towards there's something not out of place, but different for that particular feature. So back in 2023, I drove over to the area, and I went to this lady's house, knocked on her door, and I said, do you mind if I walk in the woods behind your house to go? I was going to try to get to it, right? But it's very impenetrable, and I was wearing shorts, and so Melissa told me not to show you that picture. So I went as far as I could, and then I got, and I was like, wait a minute, through the trees, those trees are significantly different than the swamp trees, right? So I got close enough to see that there's something different out there, and I had to turn back because of blood loss. So anyway, I came back to my truck, and then I washed off as best I could, and I called Melissa on the phone. I was like, hey, because head back to her house. I was like, hey, do you have any Neosporin at home? She said, oh yeah. I was like, well, how much? She said, well, why do you need to know how much I have? I'm like, well, you'll see when you get home. So anyway, but that was, so I got close enough. I was like, well, there is not only everything else, but I verified that the vegetation is different out there, right? At least I got a hint of it. So then a few months later, my friend, he brought his drone over, and again, knocked on our house, we went back out there, and we were going to fly over just to kind of see if we could get closer than either an air photo, one from 1948, or from space. And so this is how that worked out. It's kind of obvious, huh? So this is all the swamp, and then this is the feature. So see, even though it looks sunken, it's not, it's raised. Isn't that weird because of the different tree types and stuff? So, I think it stops here. Yeah. So first I walked out there and I saw a tree that was slightly different, came back and looked at this, and what is the thing that just jumps out at you that shouldn't be out in the middle of a swamp?
Palm trees.
The palm trees, right?
Thank you.
The palm trees, because they're more of a dry soil type plant. The other thing is, palm trees come from coconuts, right? Or from something that drops from the tree. Well, what are the chances they would roll up that 10-foot hill and then roll over there and then start growing, right? So that's just one of my hypotheses, if you will, that the palm trees are also showing that this might be something more than just an ancient sand dune or something that was dumped out there back in the day. Unless it was coconut farmers, but I doubt that. And then this next video is where, let's see, I think it's the next, here we go. So then we flew over and you look straight down and you can actually see dry areas in a very wet swamp. You can see all the palm trees and the different types of plants. And then in between the palm trees, so you can see dry land down there. See? So again, this is just like any other search that you do, right? You keep piling things on, and if they intersect, then it tends to lead to something else, right? And so we've got the vegetation change, we've got the elevation changes, now we have the plant differences. And so I went in Google Earth from 2008 to 2020, I went and looked at that same spot over time, and I took a point at every palm tree I could see. And so what it shows there is that it's kind of right along this edge here, right? Whereas the high ground is over here. So if you think anything would be blown over or whatever, it would have been along here. But it's actually along the highest edge of the mound. So that kind of implies that they had to come from somewhere, right? So if you build something with palm logs, or if you're eating if you're eating part of the heart and that sort of thing of the tree, then you might leave stuff around. But also there's things called middens where the Native Americans and the earlier peoples, they would finish eating and they have their own little trash dump over there. It could be something like that. Again, I might be reading an awful lot into just a pile of dirt, but it's kind of pointing that way, right? So, but what I'm saying is there's that concentration right there of the trees that might indicate that might have been where they did their things, but there might be other things going on. Okay, so after all that, I was like, all right, well, I'm going to go look at mounds around the state and try to compare their LIDAR signatures and other things and see if it's similar to this. Because, again, I'm not allowed to go out and actually look at it or do anything yet because you have to notify the authorities and that sort of thing. And I did. Actually, about 6 months ago, maybe a little bit more, I contacted the Florida Public Archaeology Network, and I told them about it, and I said, can we set up a chance to go out there? And I'm still waiting. I was hoping to do it before this, but anyway, that'll be another time. Because they also have to deal with Lake County Water Management and a bunch of other agencies, and so they're all still going back and forth. So in the absence of actually going out there, I said, okay, well, I'm going to go to these other known sites and compare them, right? And so Melissa and I have spent the last couple months doing that. So these are and then another thing about this is these are the springs, the stars, these are the mounds. So most of the mounds are associated with fresh water because you need fresh water to be by your village or whatever. It makes it a lot easier. As well as transportation, you can go out into the lakes and all that sort of stuff. So the orange ones are where we've gone to. The green ones I haven't, but they were pretty good examples of different types of indigenous mounds. Okay, so there's a book by Charles Bennett. I got a copy of it here if you want to look at it afterwards. But Jacques Lemoyne, he was a French soldier that was back in the late 1500s. And so he was touring around and he made these engravings, these drawings of various Native American villages and stuff. And so this is one of their villages, right? So it's surrounded by palm trees, cut palm trees, palm trunks. And then the majority of it are thatched roofs and everything else. So a lot of palm-based materials, right? Palm tree-based materials. And so this is what a village that he observed one place. And then this was a burial of a chief. And so they made this small mound. That, to me, looks like a chambered nautilus, that's not something you pick up off the beach. But it was most likely a conch shell or something, right? Because you can get those. But anyway, so this just shows, and they're not really good at, he wasn't very good at scale, but you can at least get an idea of the shape of a burial mound, right? If they were going to do such a thing. Now, I'm not an archaeologist, and I'm not a Native American expert or anything, so I'm not going to go into the different tribes and stuff. I'm just, from an engineering perspective, I'm just comparing structures and things. But I've read some about this, and it's really interesting. But again, that's not my thing, so I'm not going to go into it too much. But like I said, y'all can come and look at the book. It's really cool, and it has descriptions of all these various things. So mound configuration types. So there's basically 3 types structurally in the southeast. So there's coastal shell. So Crystal River. Has anyone been to the Crystal River? Over there. It's really cool. Bless you. So anyway, so coastal shell. So it's right near seawater. On either coast, there's oceanic, and there's saltwater species such as oysters, conch, and adjacent shoreline and coastal estuaries. So there's a lot of food there. But it's primarily a midden site, which, like I mentioned ago, it's basically their trash dump where they would put leftovers or broken pottery and other stuff like that. And that's why when they dig through these things, they find a bunch of broken pottery, nothing complete, because it was a trash dump, basically, right? But you can also, you can infer some information from that. There's the island shell, inland shell, and so this is in freshwater. Again, they're primarily midden sites, but the freshwater species, snails and small bivalves. So they're much, much smaller. And so from a volume perspective, it takes an awful lot more of that to build these mounds than big old oyster shells or something, right? And then inland soil. So like in the Ocala Forest and places like that, these are possibly burial sites. But there's little, they found remains, but that's primarily just sand and dirt. So, which will be important here in a sec. Okay, so this is Crystal River. So if you've ever been there, it's really, really cool. So this is the Crystal River, yeah. But this is the Google Earth. So you can't really see a lot of stuff, right? I mean, you can see the parking lot and visitor center. But if you come down and you look at the LIDAR data, in the pseudocolor, you can see, wow, that's pretty high, right? I mean, it's 75 feet above ground level, whereas it's 42 there. But you can see that, okay, well, there's something there, and then there's a little something over there. Well, this is the hillshade. So it shows the main mound. And again, you can come in and measure all this stuff and see how high they are, the volume, and all that sort of thing. So, but this was primarily a midden. And the main mound, which according to the park, it used to be about 3 times as big. It used to come over here. But what happened in the 1800s and the early 1900s, since these are all made of shell, since they're all just made of oyster shell, it's great for what?
Road construction.
Road construction, right? So they would just come in and they would mine these. You can see the cut bank right there, where they come in and they were just mining these mounds because they were all over the place, and they were using that for roads. So I think I had read somewhere there's either hundreds or thousands of mounds that were used for that, and now they're gone. But they had roads. So you can see, like I said, this is just it's 30 feet high, 200 feet long, and 100 feet wide. So, and all of shell. You can just see these are oyster shells. There's some conch shell right there. But it's just 30 feet thick and just a huge mound of primarily shells. So you can imagine how long it would take to collect them. Yes, sir.
The Boys Park over here, they sold, if you can see the Du Bois house, put that on top of those stairs. And then they sold off the land just like you're showing here for road construction.
Yeah, I didn't get down this far during my stuff, but yeah, I read about that one. We're going over to the lighthouse later, and I think there's some mounds. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's just amazing but at Crystal River, they have this and it's part of the complex. So, and I was reading that they dug down and about 19 feet below the top, they found a charcoal layer, right? A whole layer, right? Like there was a forest fire or something. So then from there on up, they dated that charcoal layer to 600 AD. So from there on, it's taken it, and then they were gone probably around 1300 AD. And so you can calculate the accumulation and just how how many oysters, right? So that's a lot of cocktail sauce. We're using the oysters. Anyway, so that's one that's, again, made of saline water, saltwater species, and they're larger. So it gives you an idea of that and the shapes. And then there's Pontoon Island. Has anyone been to Pontoon Island? It's over, if you're heading to DeLand, and there's a big bridge that goes over the St. John's, it's right near there. So it's right near the St. John's River. And so, and this is just a creek that goes by. But you can see, this is all swamp. And then there's the mound, right? See how good it shows up in these LIDARs? And then look at that, that's the shaded. So it shows you the creek, and then that's the mound right there. And it's about 600 feet from the river. So, and the other thing is, if you've ever camped out by a river, you don't want to be too close to the river because why? Bugs and stuff, right? And if it floods, if there's a storm somewhere, you don't want to be too close to the river. And like, are y'all familiar with the Sebastian River just up the way here? Okay, so my mom and I went out there camping one time, and we went over, and I bought this really fancy water filter, right? It would take everything out. And so we went, we got the water, and we said, oh, we're going to cook with this. We filtered it out. And I said, here, Mom, this is the best water you'll probably ever take. And she's like, it's salt, right? Because what I had forgot is they had dammed up the river. So the fresh water wasn't coming in anymore. So it was the estuarine coming up to the river, which was just upstream of us. But it worked really good for noodles. It was salt water already. So we didn't have to use any other salt. Anyway, the point is that they were close to a river source, but not too close, right? Because of the bugs and other things like that. But this is a midden mound, and it's made of these smaller shells. See how much smaller these shells are? So these are freshwater snails and other freshwater, and it's 30 feet high. So that's Melissa up there. So she's my scale, and a lot of other things, fiance. But anyway, so she's up there. It's about 30 feet. And then look at, that's the biggest oak tree I've ever seen in my life. It's just monstrous. It's like, it's just really big. And another cool thing that we found here is this shell right here, the snail shell. So what difference is that shell with other snail shells you've seen?
It's whole.
The hole, exactly. So that's called a culturally modified object, right? So if you've ever been to the Bahamas, there's conch shells everywhere, right? And at the back of the conch shell, there's a hole knocked in it. Because to get the conch out, knock a hole there, you cut the foot, which holds it onto the shell. You cut that, and then it comes out easily, right? Well, this is the same thing they were doing there. They were knocking holes in the back of the shells, cutting it, and then you could get the meat out a lot easier. And so that's one of the really cool things that you can find at these sites that indicates that there was human presence there, right? So, I mean, they already know because they found a bunch of other stuff at this one. But it's those little features like that on a small little shell about that big that you can see that, wow, a person actually did that. So that's another clue along the way. Now, this is 30 feet high, as I showed you, 200 feet long and 100 feet wide. So these are fairly large mounds. Okay, so that was a freshwater shell. Now this is in the Ocala Forest, and it's near Tischler Pond. It's a fairly small pond, and it's over here. But again, visually you can't see anything. Come in with LIDAR, you can see the mound and the pond, right? There's the pond and the mound. But what's cool about this one, so if it's made of soil, where are they going to get the sand from, right? You're not going to call Home Depot and bring me some sand or whatever. You have to get the sand from somewhere. Well, let me see. Yeah, I'll get there in a second. So in 1978, Dr. Reitz, she used to be with the University of Florida. She took, now this is bravery. She took about 30 Girl Scouts out in the woods for 2 weeks, and they helped her excavate and measure the mound. Yeah, that's bravery there. Couldn't even go to Walmart with my daughter, but I'm just kidding. So anyway, so this is the survey they did in 78, and they did several excavations in here. They found a burial right here in the mound, and they went north looking for the village. So they went all the way up about 600 feet because they figured the village would be north of here. And so And so this was one of the first surveys of this mound. So when Melissa and I went, I basically printed this out and used the map to walk through the woods to find it. And so we found the mound, and then I was like, well, what are these little dimples here? So we walked about 600 feet over, and we found these three dimples in the ground, I'm sorry. So what do you think those might be? They're borrow pits, right? It's where they might, if they've made this mound, they have to get the sand from somewhere. And if there's no obvious holes around the mound, then maybe they just went 600 feet away, and you know what I mean? Because if it's a sacred place, you might want to get the sand from somewhere else and bring it in, as opposed to just make a moat around your gravesite or something, right? And so that might be a thing. But it's also, if you look in the direction, it's in the direction towards the pond. So what I think is that they looked north. If they would have come this way and looked at this area, that might be where the village was, right? The village might be around there, and around the borrow pits, and there may be some other things, because that's where the food was, that's where, but, you know. So anyway, that's just my supposition, and I was going to send her an email one of these days. I just haven't yet. But that's really cool that, again, with LIDAR, you can see, not only can you see things that are up, but you can see holes in the ground, which is where they got to get the sand from somewhere. So this is Tischler Mound, this is the pond. So, you know, there's fish and there's deer and everything else around in the area. It's only 4 feet high, it's very minimal, and about 80 feet in diameter. So it's much smaller. So, and it's not a midden, at least according to their, so that's not where they threw their trash. That's where they buried. It looked like they came periodically and did burials in that mound. And then this is just Melissa standing in a hole. It's kind of hard to see, but that's one of the depressions that we found. So that's a sand or a soil-based mound. Another, like a combination, is a sand and a soil and shell construction, and it was multi-use. This is over at Spruce Creek near Port Orange, and so there's Spruce Creek, and the feature is right in here. But again, with LIDAR, you can see it. So that's kind of my point, right? LIDAR is awesome. So you can come in and actually find old features. And so this is in pseudo color, so you can see that's high, but these little places around it are lower, right? Because it's darker than the surrounding area. And it really shows up in LIDAR over here. So it's about 22 feet high, 130 feet in diameter. I haven't been to this one because it's closed for visitation. But I was able, again, remotely to go in and look at it in pretty close detail. So this is the mound here. And look at all these borrow pits around it, right? So this is where they got the sand from, and that's been proven by the archaeologists, that they did use borrow pits around the mound to build it. And this is a possible ramp that they went to and from the river, to Spruce Creek. And so that's something that's, so that kind of leads credence to the other one of these borrow pits here, right? That might be where they got it, but in this case, it was adjacent to the thing. But what's interesting is that the volume of the mound is greater than the volume taken out of these holes. So they, it might be, that's why I said multiple use. It might have been a midden and a mound for other features. They just incorporated the whole thing and got a mound that large. So, the conclusion is, what we found, it may be a human structure, possibly pre-Columbian by Native Americans, because it was not known, at least as far as I could find, from any people that came here after that. It's close to a spring and a chain of lakes, so, and it's fairly large, so there could have been a whole community, like that picture I showed you earlier. Abundant sand resources, so all around there is sand, and so since it's in the middle of a swamp, chances are they wouldn't have dug right around it, they would have gone somewhere else, right? But the areas around there have already been modified for citrus and houses and all that, so chances are those borrow pits aren't there anymore, right? They would have been dug up or anything. It's most likely soil-based because of the large size. It would take forever to eat that much seafood, probably. And the number of shellfish in that area would be huge. So, and again, it's fresh water, so you're just dealing with these little shrimp. You're not talking about the big stuff, right? And then so it needs to go out there. We need to see what it's made of. So you have people trained to go out and do test pit excavations, and kind of see what it's made of, and other things, and look around. Maybe there's, due to erosion, there might be some other stuff laying around, if it is an actual mound. I'm not saying it is, but from everything I look at, it has a pretty good chance of being there, right? And so, so those are the things right now. I've already talked to the state about going out there, and I was hoping to do it before now, but we may do it in the next month or so. But it's starting to get pretty hot and wet again pretty soon, and so it might take a little while. And we'll either come in from the lake down the spring run and we go that way, because it's only about 600 feet, or we'll come in from land, which is about, what did I say, 1,200 feet or something like that, and just hack our way through, because it's a preserve as well, a nature preserve. So you're not supposed to go in there and hack your way through. But if we have permission, then you can do it, right? So so anyway, so that's my analysis. So we found the spring, we found something. When it certainly looks like some sort of man-made, human-made thing. And now we just got to go out and see if it is. And if it is, no one's ever gone in and dug for pirate gold or ceramics or anything. It's untouched, basically, right? Which can be very valuable, because all these other mounds have been looted for centuries now, since the late 1700s. So it'd be really cool if it is, but that's my next talk, I think. So, did I just end it? There you go. So, thank you. Question time. Yes, sir.
When you talk about the aquifers, I read where one of the big private water suppliers, is that Frillis or something, they're tapping into the aquifer, and there are people who say, well, you're taking too much water out of the aquifer. Any comments about?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, so there's another spring close to here that back in the early 2000s, I was working with the landowner, and it's 160 feet deep, and there's a vent at the bottom. And so back when I was younger, it could dive that deep. My friend and I, we took a current meter down there, installed it right in front of this vent, and brought the cable back up, and recorded water flow for like 2 years. And they had just put in a waste incinerator about 3 miles away. And every time they turned their pumps on, you could hear it from the house, right? So we took a directional microphone, like the football coaches and stuff use, and we pointed it there. So every time we heard the pump come on, we would say what time it was and what day. And then we could go back and look at the flow and see what happened, right? And every time it would go down, because we're sucking all this water out of the aquifer. Because it's pressure-based, there's not a pump somewhere. It's just hydrostatic pressure, which means water at rest. And so it just comes down and it pushes that way. But if you all of a sudden suck a bunch out, it can do that, right? And so, and that's right when the villages were starting to move in. And so we went and talked to the water board, and they told us to stop and not come back. So we stopped and we come back. But yeah, so that it can certainly, it's because you're also drawing all that water down, and again, it's seeping in. It's not flowing in. It's very porous, like a sponge, and that water has to come through pressure. And so if you pump it out too fast, it can do it. But that's a different presentation. So, but is that cool? Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so with regard to the aquifers, early in my career, I was in Houston with Exxon. If you go down there, you go anywhere where they pump oil, you get subsidence, and it's a one-way street.
Yeah.
You get the compaction, and you can see it, the old telephone poles that were put in the 40s and 50s. They creosoted them up sort of high. The creosote now is 4 and 5 feet above ground. And the ground is just subsiding.
Yeah, subsidence is
Same thing will happen with aquifers, and it's a one-way trip.
Yeah, because that pressure also keeps the soil up above it, overburden, and it can settle. It's nowhere near that here yet, fortunately, but it could. So the more you take out of it, it's got to come from somewhere, and there's limitations. And then there's the pollution aspects as well, right? So So yeah, the development will certainly affect it to how much and how much is acceptable to whomever makes those decisions, right? So.
The mounds, those three examples, is the size of, are they a similar size?
Yeah. No, they're much smaller, right? But they're built on existing land. And what I'm kind of proposing is they either found a little mound and they built it up, you know, like you're bringing backfill if you live in a flood area, right? You're going to raise your house up a little bit. But they did that, so the whole village sat on there, not just a midden or a burial site. The whole thing was, and that's why I think those palm trees are around that area, kind of like that one picture I showed of the village, right? Because that's palm material, and palm trees could grow from that. So, yes, sir.
Who took the LIDAR data and how much of it is there and is it publicly available?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had that slide somewhere, but I could send it to you or something if you wanted. But yeah, so it's the Florida LADS, which is Laser Airborne Distance Survey. But they've done almost all the state except for a few small areas. And it's on, I can get it out of my computer here afterwards, but yeah, so that's where almost the whole state, and there's a couple supplemental surveys, like after Michael, when Hurricane Michael went through, they went through and they, at the heavily damaged areas, they did LIDAR just through there. So then they compare the beaches then and now, or where the houses were and now, and you can do it before and after and kind of figure out the effect of that. But yeah, they did the whole state so that they could come up with, you know, these land use models. But it's a very, very effective tool. It's so really cool. So, yes, sir.
So you started the process of the survey because of your interest in the well.
Yes, the spring. Yep.
The spring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so you just saw this and went, oh, this is interesting. Let me go down this path.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Cool.
Because I just thought it was a swamp, right? I grew up there. I've been out in swamps all over. But yeah, and I just thought, you know, it's the same old thing. But then all of a sudden, this 10-foot, 1,000-foot long thing pops up, you know, and it's just wow. And it's, yeah. And so that's when I started going through the layers, right, and looking at different aspects of it. And so that's when I notified the state, and that's when I said, well, I'm going to at least, you know, do a talk about the process of looking for something, whether that is or not. If it's just a pile of dirt, that's fine, but there's still the process of elimination of going through and trying to figure out if it's there or not, right? So I thought that would be kind of useful. I mean, I don't know what y'all really expected, but I hope this was it. Or if not, you're pleasantly surprised.
So what satellites did you use? Who owns those satellites and how do you get them to come take a look at what you want them to look at, or is all that data already out there?
So Landsat is a government system and it's up there. I think this is like the 10th version of satellites that they've put up there, but they just use it for all kinds of stuff to map the earth and look at various things. I mean, the fires out in California, they were using them to figure out where they were and where the smoke was going and all that. Because again, you can see a very large area. So they're government satellites. I use Google Earth and a couple other commercial satellite things. So just like on your phone, right? You can go to your phone right now, go to this position, and you can see it. But it's so obvious that it's not obvious. You know what I mean? It looked like a hole. You know, they didn't make swimming pools, right? So it looked like a hole, and it just looked different. I mean, it didn't look like anything until I took the trees away and I raised the elevation. And I was like, good Lord, what's that? So, and it's just out by itself, you know. I mean, I tried to get to it. And
Wear long pants.
I will next time. I'm wear a suit of armor next time. But, or a wetsuit. That might be. But anyway, yeah. So, yeah, that's just what I did. I went from that to, oh, wow, this is really cool.
Is there an application for AI in these types of studies going forward? Can you imagine that?
Right. So you can do what's called, informed classification. And so you just give AI this data and say, I want to look for this. So like say, I want to look for anything that has a height difference of 5 or 10 feet from anything in a radius around like 200 feet radius, right? And it'll just, as far as I know, it'll just crank through and just search for everything that has that. Now, granted, there's an awful lot of things like that, right? So it's better if you have additional information, like I want it to be in, swampy areas, or I want it to be within this longitude and latitude box, or you can inform it more, but I'm sure you could just let it crank through, but there's a fun in that, right? So, yes, sir.
Was it just LIDAR that would allow you to get the contours for the mound? That's so.
Yeah, because again, it's distance and ranging, right? So it just it tells you how far you are, and it tells you how big things are, and but it's a laser point, so each point's about this big, so you can just really get that high resolution. So once you know the elevation and position of every dot on there, it's easy to say, kind of like with AI, all right, well, take every dot at 0 plus 10 and connect them. And that's all a contour line is, right? And so you could just have it do that, and the software will do that for you. But it's not AI, it's an algorithm that does it. So, but yeah. So, and it's just, we've gone all these different mounts, and since I'm a 3D printing nerd, I've printed out Tischler. Remember I said that's where the little borrow pits were? And then Spruce Creek, where all those, so y'all can come up here and look at these if you want. And then I printed out the mound, but then I changed my color scheme. And then, so now this is the spring run, the mound, and the other. So if y'all wanted to come and look at this, you're welcome to. It just, because then you can kind of, oh wow, that is kind of cool, So, now I've just showed my nerd card. So, anything else? Cool. Well, thank y'all for coming and taking a chance on that write-up. I was purposely not, very specific because I can't claim that I found them out, and I didn't want to, just, it was unanticipated. Hence the title. All right, cool. Well, thank you very much for coming. Are there any questions coming up now? Good?
Oh, yeah, I had this thing.